Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. Jeff Roberts, let's jump into this episode and talk about something that none of us really want to think about, and that's nursing home accidents, nursing home injuries, and in some cases, nursing home fatalities. This is part of your injury practice. You've practiced down here in Western Kentucky for over 20 years, 27 years about, and you've seen these kind of cases. So let's talk about these. These are horrible cases to talk about.
They are. It's some of the most vulnerable citizens that we have, our loved ones, and a vast wealth of knowledge sometimes are involved in these cases and have multiple loved ones that are concerned about them, and but unfortunately there are times that our parents and elderly loved ones get to the point that we can't physically take care of them anymore. Their medical needs are greater than what we can handle, and that's the reason we have these type of facilities. But we entrust some of our most valuable and our the people who raised us, and then we have an obligation to take care of them in their later years, in my opinion, anyway.
No, I think so. And to be clear, we're not just talking about a facility that's called specifically a nursing home. I mean, these facilities go by a lot of different names, right?
Exactly, they do. I mean, a lot of times they're commonly referred to as a nursing home, but we falling under that same sort of gambit is an assisted living facility, a long-term care facility. Some are acute care or rehabilitation facility, and it's talking about a different type of rehabilitation than a physical therapy type rehabilitation from that standpoint.
Right. And I know in a nursing home specifically, I mean, typically they're providing both medical and personal care, whereas assisted living, for a lot of times, they don't necessarily need the medical as much, but it's more personal care. They might fix lunches or provide social activities and things like that. But these facilities are still regulated. They still have a certain level of responsibility to the patient or the resident, or however they deem them, however they call them. And when that happens, I mean, there's always interactions with staff or lack of interactions with staff, and problems can occur. And like you said at the outset, I mean, these are some of our most vulnerable members of society, and this is why this is such a difficult topic. But again, it's something that people need to know, that the Roberts Law Office here in Calloway County handles these kind of cases, and if they suspect something, this is a type of case that you're more than willing to take a look at and potentially step into and protect some citizens.
Yes, and these facilities are they are regulated. There's certain standards they're supposed to meet in that regard, and an assisted living facility is treated differently or has different regulations than a long-term care nursing home type facility has from that standpoint. But there's both of them have taken on voluntarily for compensation the responsibility of caring for senior citizens, some more ambulatory, like in the assisted living facility.
And by ambulatory, I mean they can just kind of get around independently.
Exactly. They're able to take care of some, if not all of their own needs. They're able to take care of some of their own needs from that standpoint. And then you have some long-term care facilities where the patients are, pretty much 100% dependent on the nursing staff and the staff of the facility to provide nearly essential care, all the essential care for them.
And while you mentioned that there are regulations that kind of control how these facilities are managed and operated, I mean, really, this is still, if something were to happen, this is not an administrative law process. If something were to happen to your mom or your dad, this is going to be pursued in circuit court. This is a normal lawsuit, such as a car wreck or some other type of civil complaint, correct?
Correct. Obviously, there's different nuances to these type of cases over a car wreck case, but it is the same situation. It's a jury trial. If you that you file it, you file it in circuit court and pursue the negligence claim even though the nuances are different, it's a negligence claim similar to any other negligence claim from that standpoint.
And from a regulatory standpoint, a lot of times these facilities are regulated in terms of the medical care they're providing or they're obligated to provide, the level of staffing. Sometimes these are inadequately staffed. And also just the cleanliness. I mean, it needs to be a sanitary environment for these people who are living there.
Yes, and there are obviously the regulations come into play, and then the doctor's orders come into play there that they're supposed to be taken care of for them. And these facilities manage medication for a variety of different patients in the facility. There, some individuals will need assistance going to the bathroom. They have a fall hazard, for instance, so they need, whenever they're up, they need someone assisting them to make sure they don't fall. Unfortunately, there are some people who need help just moving around in the bed, for instance. Right. And one of the injuries you see in these type settings is bed sores, because the person is not moved as frequently as they need to be moved there, and so there's other type of injuries that occur in these settings as well, falls and things of that nature. And whenever a loved one is injured from lack of care or proper care in the nursing home, then it can develop into a negligence claim.
Right, and these bed sores, I mean, if you were just sitting in the room and noticing a sore on somebody, usually that's a pressure point. That's where they've been laying on the same side or on their back in the same position for an extended period of time. The skin just starts to break down, but that can lead to a more severe situation where now you have a serious wound here, and not just mention the pain that the patient is sensing or dealing with at this point, and that can complicate other treatments. But that's just poor management of the patient. I mean, they're required to be turned or repositioned at certain times, and when your staffing is not at the levels or doesn't have the right training, sometimes that gets neglected.
Correct.
And that's just they should never happen. It's one of those voluntary lapses that again can be harmful if not fatal. In some cases if it's left to go untreated.
Right, and that's true, and that's one of the things that when you go visit a loved one. And unfortunately, some people in these facilities are not very verbal and can't communicate.
They can't tell you what they're experiencing or what hurts.
Exactly. Yeah. And so if your loved one is in that situation, you need to check into things on your own to make sure that they are getting the proper care. And one thing that I would strongly recommend is to not show up on the exact same day, exact same time every week, because they're going to know you're showing up and things are going to be cleaned up then.
Yeah. We always see Mama on Thursday afternoon at 4:30 or something.
Exactly. And what I'm saying shouldn't be taken the wrong way. I've represented a lot of people who in workers' comp claims who've worked at long-term care facilities, and they want to do the best as a general rule. I mean, there's always exceptions to every rule, but they want to do the best. They want to take care of the patients as well as they take care of their own family member to some extent. But we talked about short-staffed. When you've got way too few of staff for the number of patients in the facility, the bottom line of the facility is going to go up. They're going to make more money because they're paying out less for the number of cares. Mm-hmm. But the care of the patient is going to go down in that situation. And I've heard that from clients that I've represented that worked at long-term care facilities about there's just way too much, and I got hurt because I was trying to rush because I had 20 patients to care for within a short period of time, and there was no way to get it done and when that's the situation, then the patients are also suffering from the lack of proper care there, and so the family members coming in at odd or at different times to look at things, and then kind of checking and making sure, especially if you've got a family member that is nonverbal, checking and making sure that they're not developing pressure sores and things of that nature can go a long way to making sure they're getting proper care.
Well, and it's interesting when we talk about your overall experience, as we've done in previous episodes. The fact that you have actually represented some of these healthcare workers, you kind of understand the environment. You understand what to look for and what sometimes can happen behind the scenes, so that when you're representing either the patient who's at one of these facilities or the estate or the family, that kind of gives you some, I won't say unique perspectives, but it gives you some interesting insights into what to look for.
It does, and it also gives me access to information kind of in a that somebody else may not have. If you approach me with a situation that, and I'm just not sure. I'm an attorney. I'm not a
doctor.
I'm not a registered nurse in the long-term care facility, but I've represented registered nurses, and I've developed friendships with most of my clients there, and so I can reach out to them as long as they don't work at that facility. I can reach out to a past client and without giving any anything that's personally identifying to it, but I can talk to them and say, well, we've got this situation going on. What's the best way? Was it handled correctly? Was it not handled correctly from your perspective? And I can get somewhat of an informal expert opinion on it. Then if there's something there, then I can go the step to get the formal expert that we're going to need to present the case to a jury from that standpoint. But it's having someone with that kind of a background in those kind of contacts can help get the process started. And sometimes it can, frankly, while I litigate for a living, that's what I do. My number one goal is to take care of my clients, and so if I can take care of the situation and get the person the proper care and get them recovered from whatever issue's going on before it develops into a pressure sore that goes into an infection and sepsis and wound care and things of that nature, I would rather do that than have a lawsuit. I'd rather the person get better there and being able to reach out and then going back to the family member that reached out to me and say, address it this way possibly. So let's see if we can get it resolved without having to go the litigation route.
All right, but you're prepared to do so if we need to.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Let's talk about some of the common injuries that a family member or a friend might be able to see or to notice. And these are, for those who may be new to the nursing home environment or the assisted living environment, these are some things that can happen there. I mean, obviously, we talked about bed sores, but malnutrition and dehydration, I mean, that's a real factor. That's just they can't get around to make sure they've got water there, or maybe they're not eating, or maybe they haven't been served the meals as they're supposed to.
Exactly. Or some people, they have to be fed. I mean, they can't feed themselves anymore. And so, yes, you do see that much more frequently than you should, because you should never see any of it in that setting. But yeah, you see malnutrition occur, dehydration occur in a nursing home setting. I see that, at least in my experience, much more frequently than in the assisted living facility, because they have more ability to feed and to drink on their own without needing assistance from that standpoint. But it's something that should absolutely never occur, and hopefully a family member will see that before it gets too bad. But sometimes, especially with someone who's bedridden, if they have covers over them, when people get older, I've always heard your skin gets thinner. I don't know if that's true or not, but I know older people tend to get cold a whole lot easier than younger people do. I find that in myself. I get colder now that I'm getting older than I did when I was younger, and so they may have a blanket up over them, and you may not notice it if you don't pull that blanket down until the person gets into a bad health situation because of the malnutrition. So that's something to look for.
Well, and that's one of the things that makes these situations just so astounding, is that the companies are being paid by insurance or by the family or someone to make sure this happens. And because they've chosen to put profits over people, this basic care doesn't happen, or doesn't happen with the frequency it should. And especially when you have a resident or a patient who, like you said, can't really communicate effectively. I mean, this is horrible. That's why I'm so glad that you're here taking on these kind of cases, because they should never happen.
Right.
There's also the poor management of medications, and by that could be underdosing. Maybe they're not getting their full dose each time, or overdosing. Maybe the nurse is just being sloppy, or the attendant's just being sloppy, or distributing the wrong prescription. I mean, all of these happen, and these can have life-threatening results.
Absolutely, they can, and in irreversible consequences leading to death, as you mentioned, and those things shouldn't happen either. But you do, and you see that especially when you're understaffed and you've got somebody who's passing meds to a variety of different people, and they're trying to rush through it because they've got way too many patients that they're having to care for. That's where you tend to see that occur much more frequently, at least in that setting, because they're trying to rush through, and sometimes they don't double check make sure the patient that the bottle, the prescription they have is for this specific patient, and double check that that's the proper patient to be getting that medication.
Well, and unfortunately, I mean, and it's happened where someone who's distributing meds puts a few in their pocket for possibly sale or personal use later, and so the patient who was supposed to be receiving those obviously is not getting their medication. So I mean, there's all sorts of things can happen here, or you have a situation where the facility is tasking someone who's not really qualified or well trained enough to distribute medication to just step in and fill in to kind of pick it up, and so mistakes do happen.
Yeah, that should never occur. Obviously, the person should have the proper training there, but unfortunately, it does. Yes.
Yeah. And then, another topic of an injury out there is just the general neglect or poor sanitation. I mean, that happens a lot where, again, the room's not clean, or the sheets haven't been changed, or the person's clothing has not been changed, with a certain level of consistency, right, so that people are made to sit there for a while. And again, this is abhorrent. I mean, this should never happen, but unfortunately, it does.
Right.
Infection control. We talked about the breakdown of the skin. We talked about obviously the bed sores and things like that, but that can lead to infection, and trying to manage that, or try to prevent that from happening in the first place. Infections run rampant in these kind of close facilities where you've got a lot of people in a closed environment, and if proper, we're in the middle of COVID right now, so I mean, if people are not taking care to sanitize and to use PPE and all that other stuff, I mean, you can cause a lot of problems, and we've heard stories and stories of the nursing homes just absolutely being just ravaged by COVID.
Yeah, and we've had one in Western Kentucky that that has been ravaged by COVID, unfortunately, But the infection is something that a lot of this can develop into that. Pressure sores can develop into an infection. Improper sanitation, if someone needs to have their clothes changed, or if they cannot go to the bathroom, get up and go to the bathroom, and they need to be changed and cleaned from that standpoint. If that's not done in a timely manner, then that can end up developing infections for an individual from that standpoint. And it's just it can transfer. Several infections are contagious, and so it can. Some aren't, but some are, and so it can transfer to other patients in that facility as well. And so maintaining that proper level of sanitation for the individual patient and for the facility as a whole is very important.
Absolutely. And then you kind of alluded to this early on when we began this episode. Slips and falls. I mean, there are a lot of times improper use of safety guards, or the lack of a safety guard where somebody is a fall risk, and you should have known that. It was in the doctor's notes. Right. And for some reason, you either failed to use it properly, or you just ignored it because it was, quote, inconvenient.
Right. Exactly. We'll see that. I see it in the standpoint of, some people require two individuals to get them up to help them ambulate to the bathroom, for instance, because of the size of the individual. They need, one person cannot manage them. And, I see this in regard to the claim against the nursing home because the patient gets injured. I see it in regard to the workers' compensation claim because the nurse trying to take care of the patient gets injured because they don't have the staff to have two people there, one on each side, to help the person, and then the one person trying to do it ends up hurting themselves, or the person falls, or both of them fall, and both of them get injured,
Right.
and that occurs as well, and a lot of it all comes back to the way the facility is managed. There are some very, very good nursing homes out there that are managed well. They have good standards of cleanliness and sanitation. They have good, proper staffing, and then you have others that don't.
And some of them have a reputation of not, and that's unfortunate. Repeat offenders, if you will.
Yes.
These are the last two that we'll talk about here, the last two categories, and at least for the common injuries. Just you shudder to think about them, but abuse and wrongful death, and in abuse can be physical. It can be emotional abuse where they're yelling at the patient or doing different things like that, and at the worst end of this, also sexual abuse that does happen to some of these facilities, and these patients really are, like you said, they're very vulnerable, unfortunately.
Yes, and that does happen. It's, at least in my experience in this end of the state, that's a rare occurrence. The physical abuse and all of that is rare. You see it occur throughout the country at times, but the abuse, the actual physical sexual abuse, is a rare occurrence, at least as far as I'm aware of, from that standpoint. Now, the wrongful death is any of the previous ones can actually result in that. I mean, a pressure sore not properly treated can end up getting into to where it can cause an infection to the extent that it does result in
Sepsis
that.
sets in or something like
Exactly.
that.
Or same with malnutrition or dehydration. The same with the fall.
The fall that causes a head injury or something like that.
Exactly. So, I mean, the wrongful death comes in, or medication mix-up can do that as well, as we mentioned. So that's ultimately a lot of times the culmination of a long-term mismanaged care.
Right. And so if you're a family member, there's probably some red flags out there that you might want to be on the lookout for. Do you want to kind of talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, you need to kind of look over your loved one periodically, and look for skin breaking down to show a possible start of a pressure sore. From that standpoint, check the sanitation of your loved one, but also of the facility. Look in around the hallways. Look around your loved one's room. If there's if there's two patients in the room, don't go interfere and look and check over the body of the other person in the room, but look over in that area and see if it's been properly taken care of there. Check and see how the staffing is, if there seems to be a good number of staff versus patient, or if it always seems to be understaffed. And a lot of times you'll hear the staff, they'll if you talk to them about an issue, and that's what I'm really busy right now, we don't have a lot of people here, but we're going to get to that. Then that's an indication that if that's people, especially right now with COVID, people can be out in a facility, unfortunately, be understaffed because through no fault or no fault of their own, because they had 2 or 3 people call in because they were having symptoms and couldn't come in, and they couldn't get other people. But if it's
repeats,
if it's repeating a thing that they haven't come in and taken care of an issue with your loved one, and that's repeated over and over, it's a sign of chronically understaffed facility. It can be a sign of a chronically understaffed facility.
Well, there's also the communication. I mean, if the staff doesn't really want to talk to you, or seems to kind of ignore your questions, or is evasive, I mean, those are also red flags that, maybe they don't want to be as upfront about certain things because maybe there is a problem there. And those are always, that communication with the staff ought to be open and friendly. I mean, your loved one there is the customer.
Yes, and from my standpoint, that's the way it ought to be. Always, they ought to be upfront, answer your questions, and you have to understand there are some medical privacy issues. So if you are the person that is the contact that's got the power of attorney or whatever over it, then they should definitely be responsive to you and answer all of the questions. If you're, if you're the second cousin and you don't have that. There are certain things they cannot, they may not be able to answer because of health insurance privacy, or not health insurance, but health information privacy
It's going back to HIPAA.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And but the family members who are responsible for taking care of that individual, they should always be responsive to those individuals.
That makes sense. Well, if you happen to notice something, you've got a concern. Kind of what are the best steps for someone to take? I mean, how should they deal with this?
Obviously, if you've got a concern, I think the first thing to do is to address it with the facility to try to get the concern taken care of and addressed. But if it's a chronic, repeated issue, or if your loved one has suffered an adverse consequence because of it, even though you address it with the facility, then you might want to address it also with the doctor of your loved one, the family doctor of the loved one, and also then reach out to an attorney and talk with an attorney to see what other rights and avenues you may have to redress that problem.
Well, one of the issues here is the fact that if you do happen to show up on the same day, same time, on a fairly consistent basis, again, things may look a little bit better than they do when you're gone. So, you've got to have your antennas up, when you're walking into the facilities, because you're there, you're trying to protect your loved one, and that loved one needs to be protected, especially if they can't communicate on their own, So again, these kind of cases are just, they're horrible because, the other thing that you've got to keep in mind is not only are you preventing harm to your loved one, you may be protecting other patients in the facility.
Absolutely, and that is, one of the, unfortunately, sometimes on these cases, we can't really undo the damage that's been done to the person that's been injured or unfortunately possibly dead because of an event or negligence at a nursing home, and. There's only so much that the law can do. One of the things is monetary damages, but especially when you've got these facilities that are constantly understaffed and cutting these corners to save money, when they what motivates them clearly is money, and so that's where the civil justice system can be beneficial, and the civil justice system has been very instrumental in bringing about a lot of change and can make a facility that has been chronically mistreating or at least not treating properly their residents. Once they see, we could be facing in front of a jury and have to explain why we're doing this, they may say, well, we'd rather be fully staffed instead of being in front of that jury. And we, frankly, I would hope that everybody would be more motivated by, we don't want our patients to be hurt. We want them to be properly cared for.
In a perfect world, that's how it would happen.
Yeah, but unfortunately, and I've seen this too much in my career, there are some companies that are, they're what I refer to as bean counters, and they will, they think, well, we can save this much money and we're not likely to get sued because of this, so it's more financially viable for us to do this, advantageous for us to do this and understaff, even though we know we're not going to treat people well, because we're still going to make more money, and that's what we're more concerned about. And I wish I never did see that, but I've seen it way too much in my career, that's for sure.
Yeah. And oftentimes the lawsuit may be the only remedy you have there to hold this facility accountable.
There is certainly and a lot of people don't like to talk about this, but there is certainly a retribution aspect to that. Not a physical retribution, obviously, which you can't do under the law, but there is, whenever someone you can't do an eye for an eye, in a tooth for tooth situation, but that when someone does something that harms you or harms a loved one, there is a retributive quality to getting money damages, and there's some, I think, at least some psychological benefit to some of my clients in that setting, especially in the loss of a loved one situation. Is they didn't get and it's not really as much as punishing them as it is they didn't get away with this scot-free type setting, and that's more damaging to a lot of people, to think that someone has gotten away with this without any consequences to that when they've mistreated a loved one, and to see that they're not getting away with it scot-free can be helpful to someone in the grieving process. But what's more helpful is them realizing we're changing this for the better for the next person.
Exactly.
For the next person's loved one is not going to be treated this way.
Exactly. Well, let's close out with 4 important questions that I think people may be wondering about this. How does the Roberts Law Office handle a nursing home abuse claim? I mean, what is your process?
Obviously, first process, come in and talk with me about the case, and then we will talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the case and how we would go about handling that case. There's a lot of people ask the question is, about compensation and how much money they got to bring in when they come. The initial evaluation is always free of charge. You come in and talk with me. If you don't hire me, you don't get a bill for that. If you hire me, you're not getting a bill to the end of the case.
You operate on what's called a contingency fee. Do you want to explain that for somebody?
Yeah, the contingency fee is the fee is contingent upon recovery. It's a percentage of the recovery. So if we are successful, I get that percentage of the recovery. If we are not successful, I don't get paid a fee for my services. A medical negligence claim, which is, at least in my opinion, a nursing home case, falls within that same gambit. There, even though they are somewhat different, those are much more costly cases to pursue than a simple car accident case.
Well, you may have medical experts. You may have some other people that you've got to pull in. There may be a lot of depositions that you have to take. So there are all of these expenses that come along. Yeah. You cover those up front, right?
Right. I do cover those. And on a nursing home or a medical negligence claim, it's not a may have an expert witness expense. You will have. Yeah. Because if you don't have an expert witness to say the treatment fell below the standard of care, then you don't have a case. And you'll be kicked out of court. So and that's where the costs increase. On a car wreck case, I don't need an expert witness to come in and say that driver X should not have run the red light. Everybody knows that. That's the law. In a nursing home facility case, even though we may have regulations and standards that weren't followed, you still need an expert witness to testify as to what those regulations standards were. To some extent, and also in that they weren't followed, and then have a medical expert to say that violation is what led to these medical complications with that individual. So there's those expert costs in there. In those type of cases are usually much more significant expenses incurred by the attorney pursuing the claim than in a general slip and fall car wreck type negligence case.
Right, but again, those are costs that you're gonna cover up front. That's not something that the family really needs to worry about at this time. But in Kentucky, attorneys are required to say that court costs and expenses are the responsibility of the client. But okay, so let's say. But you have a slightly different policy here. You have a nuance here that if you don't prevail, if there is no award.
Yes, exactly. In Kentucky, the attorney can advance litigation expenses. I can't pay a client's electric bill or mortgage payment. I can't give money to a client, but I can pay the litigation expenses for the case, and I advance that cost. And an attorney can advance that cost, and they can be contingent upon recovery, which means if we're successful, I'll get reimbursed the expenses I've advanced. and if we're not successful, I don't get reimbursed that expense, or it can be that ultimately always the client's responsibility. So even if we're not successful in recovery, the client still has to reimburse the expense to that attorney. I handle it where the expenses are contingent on recovery, the same as the attorney fee is contingent upon recovery. So if we're successful, I get paid the attorney fee and reimburse my expenses. If we're not successful, then the client's not out of pocket a penny as far as what I've done for them.
So really, there's no risk to sitting down and talking with you about a concern that you may have dealing with a nursing home, an assisted living facility, or anything along those lines.
Correct.
Okay. And so you hate to think of it this way, but some of these cases will take a long time. What happens if the patient, the resident, actually passes, the patient actually dies while the case is being litigated or being investigated? How is that handled?
The case can still go on. It would be handled by the personal representative of the estate, depending on, even if the death is unrelated to the misconduct of the nursing facility, the pain and suffering and the other damages incurred up until death can still be pursued by the estate.
And those can be substantial.
They can be absolutely. They can be substantial. Medical costs, things of that nature, can really add up. And generally, you don't have lost wages, obviously, in this type of setting. But if the death is a result of the maltreatment, then the personal representative is the one who pursues the claim there. But that obviously the damages have changed dramatically at that point in time.
Right. So the proceeds of the lawsuit or the settlement would go to the estate, and then depending on the will or the trust or whatever, they would be more or less.
Well,
and I'm sorry, that's kind of a curveball, but I know families might be thinking about that.
Well, and it could be if it's a wrongful death, the damages for wrongful death actually go to specified individuals under the statute,
okay.
And they pass outside. Even though the claim is pursued by the personal representative, they actually pass outside of the estate.
Okay. It'd be like an insurance beneficiary almost.
To some extent. So they would go to spouse, children, things of that nature in a certain category, and all. But the damages up until death, pain and suffering, medical, that's actually would go to the estate and be distributed according to the will. Now, medical bills obviously would be reimbursed back to, if the health insurance, Medicare paid those bills and you recovered, then you'd have to reimburse Medicare.
So, and that's Kentucky law anyway. So
that's federal law.
Federal law. Okay. So, well, Jeff, this is one of those topics that none of us really wants to think about. You know, especially if you picture your parent laying in one of these facilities and suffering needlessly. But again, I really appreciate your time and your candor on this. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're available, to families to talk to and to seek some guidance from, okay. And if necessary, to pursue a lawsuit on behalf of the patient. So, any closing words on this one, Jeff?
Well, the only closing words on this is that if your loved one's in one of these facilities, do research on the facility before you place your loved one in one. But even after they're there, because the facility can be good and then management change and go down. So just play up, keep an eye out, make sure you're looking, go visit as frequently as you can, have different family members go visit different times of the day to check on the person, and and if there's an issue there, address it. And if you need to, I just assume you never need my services. If you can pull them out and put them into a better facility, do that.
Fantastic. Jeff, again, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. And friends, I hope you got some good information here. There will be show notes available for this episode on Jeff's website. So if you go to jeffrobertslaw.com, there's a page on there for podcasts, and you'll see basically a summary of this episode. And you'll see some links to some other related topics on the website and other previous podcasts that may overlap in here. But I want to thank you for your time, and we'll be back in about 2 weeks. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.